Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with Laura Goode. Laura is the author of several books, most recently Pitchcraft, the writer's guide to getting agented, published, and paid. She teaches at Stanford University and lives in the Bay Area. We're excited to be with her today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities at thedatekeepers.com.
Laura, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. Can you please tell us about you?
It is such a pleasure to be here. Oh my God, I tell you about me. That's like a first date question. What can I tell you about myself? I teach at Stanford. My most recent book is called Pitchcraft, the writer's guide to getting agented, published, and paid. I am the mother of 2 human children, and I am very happy to be speaking to you from San Francisco.
And how did you become a writer?
I was an only child and a library kid. I was one of those little weird kids with big glasses who only knew how to talk to adults, because I didn't have like peer-to-peer social interaction in my early life. So I turned to books for the feeling of being seen, I think. And I just became so attached to them. So I was one of those weird people who knew what I was here to do very early. I think I knew I was a writer before age 10, maybe even before age 8. So that's a weird dysfunction of my upbringing.
I relate to that.
Yeah. I think a lot of writers start out as like lonely bookish kids, I think that's kind of our DNA.
Well, I am different than all of you guys because I was in the world where books were not available and I just had the oral stories. But it's still, stories are stories no matter how.
The storytelling is storytelling no matter how you get to it.
What were some of your formative, the books you read really early that just made a lasting impression on you that you still think about?
Man, that's a great question, especially because my first published book was a young adult novel. So I spent a lot of time thinking about early influences as I was constructing these teenage characters. It's never a bad time to talk about Anne Frank's diary, but have either of you read that book as an adult?
Yeah. And I am from Morocco. And I didn't have access to the internet, not because the internet doesn't exist in Morocco, but I grew up, as I said, without education even until later in life. But anyways, the way I was reading was through a CD player, with those, like a radio or the ones where you have the cassette that you're recording. So I had it, but I didn't do any research before I read the book. And I remember as I was reading it, I was so excited to know where was she, about her kids.
Sure. Oh, God, you went in completely cold. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was so hurt at the end. I was like, why? Why didn't I know all of this? And looking back, I am really frustrated about the education system. I was taught just what they wanted me to know. All I was taught about the Holocaust was that they deserved it.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about the history that I had the right as a student to know. It made me think a lot about life and about what does it mean to be an innocent human being and how the cruelty, she was just there and writing about her boyfriend and having these future plans and then she wasn't,
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I think that's a really beautiful and authentic reaction to that work because what you say is true. It is a horrible injustice that she doesn't have grandchildren and that her story ended there. And that seems like a very appropriate response to the tragedy that book represents. And I think when I took it in as a child, I remember it just meant so much to me to see a young female author, to see a teenage girl's diary being treated as literature, I think made a huge impression on me as a young reader. And then, another thing about me as a reader is I am a serial rereader and rewatcher. The things I love, I take in over and over again. And some things reward that kind of revisit and some things don't. But Anne Frank's diary just rewarded revisit as an adult. And the adult read made such a big impression on me too. And part of it was exactly the injustice you were just describing. Here's a young person of immense talent and promise who should have had a long career. and wasn't granted that. And I don't know, I get kind of nerdy about the archives on this stuff too. And there's a lot of new material that's emerged about the diary since I would have read it as a child in the 90s because Anne Frank's father, Otto Frank, died. And there were certain things about, like, nasty things that she had said about her mother or things that she had written about sex that he had extricated from the original diary that eventually got republished as a full folio after his death. So the book has actually changed in the last 30 years between my readings of it. Anyway, I could go on about Anne Frank, but clearly that book made a big impression on me. I also remember noticing a theme as I was writing the young adult novel that the books that I was inclined to return to that had meant so much to me were usually about lonely, bookish girls. Like Anne Frank is a perfect example. I loved Anne of Green Gables. I love A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I have a first edition of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn that a friend gave to me. Those kinds of stories that are so obviously like the origins of a writer kind of stories, but I just didn't know that when I was 12. They just resonated with me when I was 12. Those are the stories that made a really big impression on me.
Yeah, and one thing that made me really happy at the end, knowing that her father kept her diaries and published them. And I
Yes.
thought, wow, this is really good. And as I lost my parents as a younger person, and now, of course, it's me and my husband. We don't have a relationship with his family either. And I'm like, wow, if we die, how are we going to make sure that our work gets published? You know,
Legacy questions. Yeah.
yeah. But at least for her father, yeah, I mean, he was embarrassed to publish everything because
He's a father and a human. It's understandable,
at least he published some.
Absolutely. It was such an act of generosity, not just to his daughter, but to the world to publish those diaries. And he saw that and deserves a lot of credit for the brilliance of that foresight.
I should add also, I love Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Oh my God, yes, absolutely. I was just having a Crime and Punishment discussion with someone. Yeah, I read those books in high school and early college. I love Russian literature. Actually, the story you were just telling about going into Anne Frank completely cold, having no idea how it ended or what happened afterwards, that's exactly the way I went into Anna Karenina somehow. I don't like spoilers. I just opened it and had no idea how it was going to end or there was a train coming or anything. The one thing I will cut to if I open a new book that I love and I'm 50 pages in is I love reading the acknowledgments pages. They're just such a good source of gossip and like who this author knows and the journey that the book traveled to meet the audience. And like, I love an acknowledgments page.
And like some of them are so stale and formulaic, but some of them are like, it's like a whole other little book in.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And you can always sort of tell, I don't know, people will use really fraught euphemisms with their exes. Like, I don't know what the story is, but I know that there is a story. And I love that.
And then and I wasn't a big fan of this book, but Dave Eggers' heartbreaking work of Staggering Genius, the acknowledgement was like, it was parody. Because I think he thanked all of his friends at NASA for their very invaluable contributions to the book. There was nothing about NASA.
Funny.
Yeah, no, a good acknowledgments page is great. And you can kind of tell when you glance over it, because if it's just a long list of names, then yeah, those people are cool, but there's no narrative. But
there's no context then. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And what themes do you cover in your work?
In some way, every work I've ever written has been about female relationships. And sometimes those have been romantic relationships. Much more often, they've been friendships. And in particular, I think the female best friendship is one of the most epic connections that exists in the world and is so rarely narrativized than quote-unquote love stories. I think it is its own love story. So I would say that feminism as it relates to human connectivity and to female relationships is a really big theme for me. I also have this weird preoccupation with God. So I would say that like faith and spirituality would comprise another major theme of my work. And that's so weird. Like I grew up Catholic and Catholicism is so embattled for me. And I think today I don't consider myself an active or practicing Catholic, but there are days that I do consider myself a practicing Catholic. And I think these questions of like just reckoning with the divine and who is allowed to talk to the divine and who is allowed to feel close to the divine and who is allowed to report back from the divine are really big themes across my work. That feels very spacey to try to put into words, but I definitely think that faith is up in there in the cauldron of what I'm dealing with.
And it's good that you go through different phases because then you will have different characters. One character is like, yeah, I'm good today. I am a Catholic. And then next time, no, I'm not. Yeah. Good for us to have different thoughts and, try to experiment with the characters.
Yes, I agree with you. And I also think that reckoning with one's own relationship to spirituality, whatever that relationship becomes, like totally regardless of outcome, feels like such an important part of adult and young adult development to me. And it's a question that comes up often with my students. Obviously, I teach at a secular university and I'm not ever here to evangelize in any way. But I think that the action of writing contains a lot of faith, like you are rowing towards an outcome that you can't see most of the time. And you just have to kind of hold this faith that you can get there step by step. So when I meet very stressed out students, as I often do at Stanford University, a question I often ask is just like, what are your spiritual practices? I don't care what they are. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way to do any of those practices, but I do think that thinking about what you want them to be for yourself is a healthy step for anybody that can make all of us feel more supported and less alone.
How does that tend to go over with Stanford students?
All different ways. I have truly met students of all backgrounds at Stanford, like all faiths, all national origins, ethnic identities, all these things. I will say that the ones who are currently practicing are usually practicing in some sort of woo-woo witchy way, which, we're here in the Bay Area. That's not hugely surprising. But I will also note that I have met a striking number of Stanford non-traditional undergraduates who are women who have escaped from some sort of religiously oppressive community. And I think that that's a really interesting connection, that people who feel excluded from a faith community of origin are seeking education or a different kind of institutional affiliation that will feel better. Whether that does feel better for them, I don't know. I can't speak to that, but it's just been an interesting theme that I've noticed throughout my time at Stanford.
I don't know how much you read about religious trauma, but I didn't know anything about it, even though I was experiencing it. Sometimes reckoning with the monster, naming it and knowing it is the best option. But I didn't know that I was experiencing religious trauma. I was having
neither.
These nightmares. I grew up in Morocco and I am of a Jewish descent, Sephardic North African Jew. But my family didn't practice any of that. Like they were not even, like as I said, we didn't have access to anything. They couldn't read the book, so they were just mixing the Jewish culture and some things that they made up or whatever or got from other cultures. But then my mom's family, they're Arab Muslims. And I think when you hear stories of people who say, I left this cult or that cult, whether it's Islam or Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormonism or whatever it is, I think it's the experience that people get from the institutions. Because institutions are run by human beings, and human beings are flawed. And people who have that kind of trauma, the institutions that try to, quote unquote, deal with that trauma are worse than the religious institutions.
That's why I was pausing and being like, I don't know how well this institutional swap goes. I completely triple underscore to everything you just said. That's like lighting my brain on fire. Yes, I don't know how well it goes or how successful it is to swap in one institution for another. I do know that many... I think it definitely can be. I also know that a lot of the students I'm thinking of as I'm talking are specifically women who specifically fled from the religious upbringing because of its denial of education to women. And I find that really complicated and really moving. I do think that education has transformative power, but I don't know that institutions do. And that's a really hard tension to hold in this frame. I have to quote one of my favorite authors here, the sociologist Tressie McMillan Cottom, who has said many times on the record, college promises you that we're going to change your life. We didn't promise it was going to be for the better. Exactly what you just said. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I tried joining the atheist groups and that was worse.
Interesting.
There are a lot of quote unquote therapists who help people who go through religious trauma. And when someone like me, or actually worse, but at least we're right, calls them, they make fun of those people. And I hated it. I'm like, man, this is worse. They were like, are you stupid? Why are you doing this? You're dumb. And I'm like, dude, you're dealing with someone who's traumatized. And it was crazy. It was like, wow, these people are so abusive.
I'm really glad you flagged religious trauma because that's both a term that I identify with and just like not a term that I think really existed in the mainstream parlance when we were growing up. And I grew up in the Midwest. Like most of the area that I grew up in was not Catholic. It was Lutheran because I grew up in the deep Midwest of Minnesota. And this was the era of like purity culture and promise rings and saving our virginities and all of these really like overtly abusive dynamics. I think that in some ways we're only now beginning to unpack what the impact of those things were.
Yeah, but also, where is the balance? Like too much freedom also can be a disaster.
Sure.
Like I am not a mother, But if I were a mother and I have a teenage daughter and let her just go and roam around, that will not be healthy either.
No, all young people need boundaries for their own protection. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut this off, but can we talk about your books some more too?
I would love to.
Yeah, I want to hear more about what you've been writing lately and what projects you've got coming up.
Well, what I just published is this book, Pitchcraft, that I mentioned before, and I've been sort of like on tour with that and doing conversations about that for the last couple months. I have been teaching pitching and publishing at Stanford for now 7 years and online for several years before that. And I have an MFA too. Like I have a terminal degree in the field of writing, or what was at the time I got it considered a terminal degree in the field of writing. And like nobody in that program breathed a word to me about how to actually sell my work or be a professional who is paid.
Not just your program.
Correct. Yeah. And I can't think of any program that was doing that. I really wanted to write a handbook that would be a companion to people who were on any phase of the writing journey, people who were just starting out, people who were really experienced. I really wanted to give them something empathetic and practical that's like, here's how you pitch an editor. Here is how you find an agent. Here's how you build a website. I had to teach myself all of those things. So Pitchcraft is my attempt to offer that training more broadly than I received it.
I love that. I was on a journey a couple of years ago looking for an MFA because I come from journalism and I couldn't find any MFA that offers what I was looking for. So I decided to start the whole thing on my own, learning everything. And that's how our business was built, is like,
Fascinating.
what we've learned, how are we going to give that? And that's how the podcast also is starting. And a lot of people are like, wow, you guys are doing the podcast. And I'm like, yeah, it's taking a lot of time and energy from us, but it's worth it because it's love and passion.
Yeah. And Laura, like you, I also have an MFA. And for me, it was like starting from scratch. Like Ito and I were learning the same basic things together. I mean, like, in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of getting work published and negotiating with publishers and what opportunities there, it was like starting from zero after a 4-year degree, terminal degree. It's great that you're doing that.
I just can't tell you how many times I've heard versions of that story. You know, what you say is so familiar to me and there is so little training in it. And I think there's a meta layer of this that also makes me really angry. Is it part of the reason that training doesn't really exist in craft programs like MFA programs is because there is an attitude that artists leave the business practices to other people, like to other professionals, which is not true. And it's also a bananas way to conduct a career. You know, like I don't want to outsource all of my power to other people. I don't want to assume that other people know more about my business than I do. And it's so weird. Like I have an MFA in poetry. What I would love to do as a job for the rest of my life is just read poems quietly and uninterrupted. Unfortunately, that is not a job, you know? That is part of what informs my passion to distribute business skills widely to creatives is I think we should take ourselves seriously. I think we should be standing on our own business. I think we are capable of doing that. I don't think that we're just flighty alcoholics who can't be bothered to file taxes. We can be professionals too. We are professionals. There is a way that professionals behave that should be just as consistent among creatives as it is amongst more traditionally businessy fields. It's so weird to me to be like this angel of capitalism teaching business skills, but it just feels like such an egregious gap to me that training was not offered to me.
Yeah, I mean, some authors have the ideology like, no, I'm writing as an art. I'm like, well, but you want people to read your writing.
Absolutely.
And if you want people to read your writing, you have to make a business of it to put it in the hands of your readers. And to some people, thankfully, very few in my experience, it's like you're telling them it's cold and hot at the same time.
I completely agree. If you want to write and you never want to publish for the rest of your life, I salute you. But if you do want to publish, then that becomes a professional practice. That becomes a business. And so you have to know business principles and you have to be able to take yourself seriously enough to know and act upon them. And like, I didn't want to be a hobbyist. I have other hobbies that I will never monetize, and I'm glad I have them. Like, those are really good for the health. But I am a professional writer, so I want to behave like a professional. Like basic business practices that would be applicable across all different disciplines. You know, show up on time, do the things that you say you're going to do, answer your emails, file your taxes. These are just basic things that adults have to do. But I think there's another layer that's like a little less practical and more metaphysical. I talk with my students about networking not as transactional, but as a heart-forward act of just talking about your passions and showing curiosity in the passions of people around you. I'm not here to be like, go to every cocktail party you can get your hands on and pass out every business card and spam every person. Like, that's not what I'm after at all. I just have derived so much personal joy in my life from reaching out to people and being like, crazy crazy idea. Do you want to put on a play on April 9th? Yes or no? If yes, here's our next 10 steps, you know? And I have also derived joy from being like, what are you working on right now and how can I help? Who can I tell? What can I do? People really remember those moments of showing up. I know that I do.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I came to writing not only from journalism, I was working on human rights, things that are not related to writing at all. When I decided to work for myself, I was so fed up with human rights NGOs because they talk a lot, but they don't do anything. That's my experience. And I believe that I can actually make the world a better place on my own by building my own community. I decided to work for myself. And I remember my first 5 months, I was like, oh my God, I don't even know where to send my work. And after 8 months, we published in over 50 literary magazines all over the world. Just
I
doing
love that.
research, learning, and
Yeah, step
we
by
are
step.
very sharing that with other people. And I think some people are so scared. They think there's only like 30 literary magazines out there. Well, it's actually not true. There's over
Oh, there's so many.
6,000.
I love that story. I love that story. What I just heard you describe is another business practice that I'm really passionate about, which is like taking a big abstract dream and breaking it down into manageable, actionable parts, which is how every project that has ever moved you or me began. You know, like everything begins as chicken scratch on a blank page, and we just have to figure out one step after another. This brings me to one of my favorite principles. My family is full of ex-drunks, and the Alcoholics Anonymous people in my family are some of the best people in my family, the 12-steppers. And there's this concept in AA called the next right thing, the principle of which is just like, okay, so you're completely overwhelmed. You just quit whatever was hurting you 5 days ago, whatever. You have no idea what's going on. Everything hurts. There's no possible way you can vision the next 5 years right now. So what is the next thing? And it can be as small as like, I'm going to walk out of this room and take a shower. But the next right thing is like a headlight in the dark. I'm such a perfectionist and an overachiever that like I always really want to build the 5-year vision plan. And so often it is just not possible. And I really rely on the concept of the next right thing as a way of taking it one step at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always ask guests to read, and I'm really excited to hear an excerpt from your book. Do you have something from it that you would like to share?
Sure. So I will read from the introduction to Pitchcraft, which is sort of a description of how I entered this realm of teaching pitching. And the only thing you need to know about where I'm standing in this story is my self-esteem is in the toilet and everything is going wrong. So I write, as I pitched, I gradually developed a pitching procedure for myself. I scoured social media for pitch calls and personal connections, and the structure of my emails to editors gained a kind of familiarity. It dawned on me that, even though I was, in my own current estimation, a no-talent garbage fire destined for a life of broke and bitter obscurity, I had published 2 books, held full-time reporting jobs, written, produced, funded, and distributed an independent film, worked with 2 literary agents and a film distribution agent, written for a vibrant bouquet of magazines, and taught the craft of writing everywhere from maximum security prisons to elementary school classrooms. For better or worse, I had amassed journeywoman experience as a writer. I was certain that there were more qualified pitching experts for writers out there, but I just couldn't seem to find them. Then I wondered why, in the 2 years I had spent at a top MFA program with a nearly 6-figure price tag, no one had breathed a word about how to pitch a story in a manner that might compel another literary professional to pay me for that skilled labor. In almost every vocation, the tuition of a graduate degree is offset by future earnings. One invests in graduate school with the expectation that it will increase one's future earning potential in the field. If a graduate student pays in tuition for a writing program more than many Americans earn in a year, then it seems reasonable to expect, if retrospectively, that this program might have devoted even 5% of its curriculum to the question of making a living as a writer. My MFA curriculum made no such pretense, let alone promise. I know this because no one offered me a class on how to build an effective author website and online presence, query an agent, cold pitch an editor, negotiate rates, read a contract, or manage any of writing's other business concerns. Yet these mechanisms are also how books are born. Looking back, I see this absence as criminal, a hose job of epic proportions. I was taught to scan, to critique, to revise, to review. Why was I not taught to pitch? It felt so procedural. I had this nagging feeling that after making the rounds of multiple genres, I could come up with a template for pitching just about anything. I spent about a month banging everything I knew about the literary agency into a 70-page document. About a month after that, I started teaching the online class How to Pitch Anything. I went into the first class the way I go everywhere, Overprepared out of fear of being underprepared. I was ready to offer tips. I was ready to serve up tricks. I was ready to make action plans. It took me about 30 minutes of witnessing the sheer vulnerability and terror of the students before me to realize that the tips, tricks, and action plans were necessary, but so was a deep engagement with the psychology of rejection, perfectionism, and fear of failure. All feelings I was intimately familiar with at that particular moment. And in this way, I realized how to survive rejection had to be part of any pitching practice. Rejection had, after all, almost killed me. This clarity lingered with me. On the subject of surviving rejection, if on nothing else, I was utterly confident about my qualifications. That was something I could teach. It became clear with every class meeting that teaching pitching was synonymous with teaching how to perform confidence. My task was to teach my students how to walk into a room, literal or digital, and convince a stranger that they had an original, actionable idea. I taught them that if they could hatch that idea, make an argument for it, and thoughtfully select a target for that idea's argument, they deserved to be paid for that labor. I taught them that to be treated like a professional, acknowledged, taken seriously, paid, they first needed to regard themselves that way. It was striking, though not at all surprising, to witness how skeptical the marginalized, queer, trans, and non-binary people, differently abled people, people of color, people born outside the United States, white women, were that anyone might treat them like professionals. Confidence became the linchpin of my pitching pedagogy. Shoot your shot, and let your curiosity and ambition speak louder than your fear. My theory about confidence, which I tell students again and again, is that you don't actually have to feel it. All you have to do is project it. What I have internalized for myself through teaching others is the difference between a submission and a pitch. You can see it in the gesticulations of the words themselves. A submission lies prone, while a pitch acts kinetic. A submission says, "Please pick me, I'll be waiting." A pitch says, "Catch me or you'll miss the ball." A submission is passive, a pitch active. I am so tired of the artistic narrative of a pretty girl being discovered in a soda shop. A professional is not discovered. She refuses to be ignored, to go unheard. If you cannot have an idea and summarize it effectively to a stranger, if you cannot argue for your own argument, if you cannot locate a story in your own tangled knot of pretty words, if you cannot identify an opportunity and shoot your well-aimed shot at it, then you have no business calling yourself any kind of professional writer. A career doesn't just sit there like a gift to be unwrapped. You have to wind up and throw, drop the ball, pick it up, throw again.
Dude, you're so blunt. I love it.
I prefer directness, it just makes life a little bit easier, and the tone of this book is very real talk, here's what no one told me. So I appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Thank you for reading and thank you for coming on.
Oh, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, Laura, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
All right, take care.
You too.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.